All right, so welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at Neil Gaiman's The Sandman.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and it's such a rich text, and there's so much to talk about. But we decided to focus on
Mm-hmm.
one of the big themes that runs the whole series,
Mm-hmm.
and that's self-evolution.
Yeah, that's a great one to focus on. There's a lot to unpack there for sure.
Yeah, and so we've got this academic paper that's going to kind of be our guide
Okay.
for this deep dive.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that really makes you think about is, can beatings as old and powerful as the
Yeah.
endless really change?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we're
Yeah.
talking about entities that embody like fundamental forces of existence.
Yeah.
So does the concept of change even like apply to them?
Right. And that's what's so interesting about the way Gaiman approaches this. I mean, he starts by really examining Morpheus, the
Yes.
embodiment of dream. And the paper kind of sets the stage here by pointing out how Morpheus initially comes across as this incredibly rigid,
Mhm.
almost cold figure. He's been ruling the dreaming for eons. So you could argue, like, why should he change?
Exactly. He's literally like the stuff that dreams are made of. But even with that in mind,
Yeah.
there's this one example that the paper points to that I found really jarring,
Okay.
and it's his treatment of Nada.
Oh, Nada. Yes.
She's this lover from centuries past,
Right.
and basically Morpheus condemns her to an eternity of suffering just because their romance was forbidden.
It's a brutal punishment, for sure.
Yeah, it is. And so what do you make of that?
Well, it's definitely a turning point, I think, both in the narrative itself, but also in how we understand Morpheus's character.
Okay.
You know, the paper argues that this act really reveals a deep-seated conflict within him.
Okay.
On the one hand, he's obviously bound by duty, the rules that govern the dreaming.
Mhm.
But on the other hand,
Right.
it shows this capacity for ruthlessness that's hard to reconcile with the idea of him being this, just ruler. I mean,
Yeah.
there's this line that the paper quotes. It says, Morpheus's actions toward Nada expose the inherent tension between power and compassion, suggesting that even the most well-intentioned beings can succumb to the allure of control.
Wow, that's powerful. It makes you wonder if Morpheus isn't as in control of his own nature as he thinks he is.
Exactly. And this tension is further explored through his relationship with his son, Orpheus.
Right, Orpheus.
Of course.
Yeah, now, anyone who's familiar with the Orpheus myth knows it's a tragedy waiting to happen.
Definitely.
And in The Sandman, it plays out in a really heartbreaking way.
It does.
So Morpheus, he refuses to grant Orpheus's pleas for release from this just horrific fate.
Mm-hmm.
He basically chooses duty over his own son's suffering.
Right, and that's huge because, as the paper points out, it highlights just how deeply entrenched he is in this role as Dream.
It's like he's trapped by his own power almost.
Almost like he's unable to act out of compassion,
Right.
even when it's his own flesh and blood we're talking about.
Yeah, but then here's where things take a surprising turn. Later in this series, Morpheus does grant Orpheus's request.
Right, it's a complete reversal.
Yeah, I didn't see that coming at all.
And the paper analyzes this shift as like a monumental crack in Morpheus's seemingly unyielding facade.
Okay.
Like, it argues that this act of mercy actually signifies a really profound internal shift.
Mhm.
He's finally choosing compassion over this rigid adherence to duty.
Right.
He's acknowledging the pain that he's caused both to Orpheus and to Nada.
So is this like a one-time thing?
Right.
A momentary lapse in his usual coldness? Or is this the beginning of a genuine transformation for Morpheus?
Well, that's the question that the paper leaves us pondering.
Okay.
It suggests that this act of compassion really opens the door to real, lasting change for him.
Mm-hmm.
Like, even beings as old and powerful and endless, they can evolve.
Yeah.
But it also acknowledges that change isn't a simple, straightforward process.
Right.
It's messy. It's often painful.
Yeah.
And it's full of setbacks, for sure.
That makes sense. I mean, we see this all the time in our own lives, right?
Yeah.
Change rarely happens overnight. It's like this constant grappling with our past and our beliefs and the choices we make. But I'm curious about the other characters. It's not just about Morpheus. I mean, the dreaming is full of all these really interesting individuals, each with their own stories.
Absolutely.
So do their journeys also tie into this theme of self-evolution?
I think they do. And the paper really emphasizes how the supporting characters' journeys actually enrich and deepen our understanding of these main themes. It's like their stories provide a different lens through which to view this whole idea of change.
So it's not just about one character's transformation, but about exploring the many facets of change through all these different experiences.
Exactly. And this is where things get really interesting. Let's take Lucien, for example, the Dreaming's librarian.
Okay, Lucienne, yeah, she's like the backbone of the dreaming, right?
She is.
Making sure everything runs smoothly, even when things get chaotic.
Keeping it all together.
Yeah, kind of reminds me of a lot of the unsung heroes in our own world.
That's a great
The
comparison.
people who keep things going behind the scenes.
Exactly. But as the story unfolds, we see Lucienne taking on more and more responsibility.
Okay.
Especially when Morpheus is absent or struggling.
Right.
She steps up in a big way, showcasing incredible strength and wisdom.
So her growth kind of mirrors Morpheus's own journey in a way.
I think it does. He's learning to delegate, to trust others. And maybe even to admit that he needs help.
And Lucienne is rising to the occasion.
Yes.
Embracing this leadership role she might not have imagined for herself before.
Right. And her evolution highlights a crucial aspect of change, I think.
Okay, what's that?
It's that willingness to step outside of our comfort zones, to embrace new challenges, and to realize that growth often comes from letting go of control a little bit.
That's interesting. Then you've got Rose Walker, the human who becomes the dream vortex.
Right.
Talk about a life change.
She gets thrown into this world of immense power.
Yeah.
And suddenly she's forced to deal with the consequences of her choices.
It's like a crash course in responsibility.
Absolutely. And the power of free will.
Right. And her journey, it provides such a stark contrast to Morpheus's.
I think so, too.
While he's grappling with this weight of his eternal duty, she's forced to confront the complexities of choice and consequence from a purely human perspective.
And it raises a question, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Does having less power actually give you more freedom to change?
It's a good question. It makes me think about how we often perceive limitations as barriers to change.
Right.
But maybe, just maybe, those limitations can also be catalysts for growth.
That's a brilliant insight. And it ties into another fascinating character arc, Matthew the Raven.
Oh, yeah, Matthew. So imagine going from everyday human life to serving a cosmic being like Morpheus.
What a shift, right?
I can't even wrap my head around that.
It's a complete upheaval of everything he knew. His entire reality shifting in an instant.
And yet Matthew's evolution isn't about resisting this change.
Not at all.
It's about accepting it.
It is. He finds purpose and even joy in his new role.
So it's not just about the scale of the change then. It's about how we choose to adapt and grow, regardless of the circumstances.
Exactly. Matthew's story underscores this idea that change, even when it's drastic and unexpected, can lead to a deeper understanding of ourselves and our place in the world.
It's about finding meaning in the unexpected.
Yes.
And realizing that even the most profound transformations can be a source of growth.
Exactly.
So it seems like each supporting character adds another layer to this idea of what change really means, whether you're an immortal being like Morpheus or a human navigating the twists and turns of life. The Sandman reminds us that evolution is a constant possibility.
It's not just a possibility, though. The paper makes this point very clear. Change is woven into the very fabric of the dreaming.
Okay.
And, by extension, into the fabric of our own reality.
So it's a universal constant.
It is. It shapes us all, whether we realize it or not.
That's a powerful thought. It makes you wonder, if change is so ingrained in who we are, what does that mean for our sense of self? Can we ever truly escape our basic nature? Or are we always in a state of becoming?
And that's a great question to leave us on for now. We'll dive deeper into that very question in part 2 of this deep dive.
Okay, sounds good. Stay tuned. Okay, so we've seen how Morpheus and a lot of the other residents of the dreaming are grappling with change. But now I'm kind of curious about the bigger question. Can you really change who you are at your core?
Yeah, that's a big one.
Like, is it all just reaction to events, or is there something more profound going on?
Well, it's a question that's central to the Sandman, for sure. And this paper we're looking at really digs into it. It highlights this constant tension between identity and change.
Okay.
And we see this most clearly with Morpheus. He's obviously trying to uphold his duties as Dream, but he also seems to realize that things need to evolve, that clinging to the past can be destructive.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. He's been around since the dawn of time. His ways are literally ancient, but even he is being forced to confront this need for change.
Right.
It makes me wonder if any of us are truly exempt from this process of evolution, no matter how set in our ways we might be.
And that's what the paper argues, that the Sandman is essentially holding up a mirror to us,
Okay.
forcing us to confront this very question in ourselves. And it does this through characters like Lyta Hall.
Right, Lyta Hall.
She's a human who becomes deeply entangled in the events of the dreaming and experiences just unimaginable loss.
Her story is absolutely heartbreaking. It would be so easy to understand if she just shut down completely.
Yeah.
unable to move on from the tragedy she's endured. Grief can do that to you.
It can. It can make you feel like you're trapped in this cycle of pain and you can never escape.
Exactly. But here's where the Sandman gets really interesting. Lyta's response to her tragedy isn't passive.
Right.
The paper quotes this passage. Lyta's journey embodies the resilience of the human spirit, demonstrating that even in the face of profound loss, growth and transformation remain possible. She finds a way to accept her new reality, to forge a path forward, even while carrying the weight of her grief.
And it's not about becoming a better version of ourselves necessarily. It's about accepting who we are, even the messy parts, even the broken parts, and finding a way to integrate those experiences into our evolving sense of self.
So where do you stand on this? Do you think people can fundamentally change at their core, or are we always bound by our basic nature?
It's a question philosophers have debated for centuries, and I don't think there's an easy answer, you know? The Sandman offers a nuanced perspective.
Okay.
It suggests that change is possible, even for beings as old and powerful as the Endless. But it also acknowledges that change is a process, often fraught with struggle and setbacks. And ultimately, it's up to each individual to choose how they navigate that process.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think it's important to remember that we're all on our own unique journeys.
We are.
What might look like change for one person might be something completely different for another. There's no one-size-fits-all answer.
Exactly. And speaking of different perspectives, I think it's time we zoomed out a bit and considered Morpheus in the context of his family, the Endless.
Oh yeah, the Endless. We've been so focused on Morpheus, but he's just one piece of this larger puzzle.
Right. Each of them represents a fundamental force of existence. Death, desire, destiny, despair, delirium, destruction.
It makes you wonder how they deal with change. Are they even capable of it?
Well, that's where the Sandman gets really clever.
Okay.
It uses the Endless to showcase this entire spectrum of responses to change.
Okay.
Take death, for example.
What? Yeah.
She's not the grim reaper you might expect.
Right.
Instead, she's kind and compassionate. She fully embraces the ever-changing cycle of life and death.
I love that Gavin took such a dark, often feared concept and turned it into something so human. It's like he's saying that change, even death, is a natural part of the universe.
Yeah.
Something to be embraced rather than feared.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then you have desire, perhaps the most intriguing sibling in relation to this theme.
Desire. Okay.
Desire is all about manipulation, constantly scheming, always pursuing new wants and experiences.
Okay, but wouldn't you say that constantly seeking new experiences is in itself a form of change?
Yeah.
It's like they're constantly evolving, even if it's driven by their own selfish desires.
That's a fascinating interpretation, and the paper does acknowledge that desire's relentless pursuit of novelty could be seen as a twisted form of change.
Okay.
It raises the question, though, doesn't it? Does the motivation behind change matter? Can true evolution occur if it's driven by selfish desires? Or does it require something more selfless, like Morpheus's growing compassion?
It's like we're being asked to consider the different shades of change, the complexities and contradictions inherent in the process.
Exactly. And then there's Delirium, the wild card of the family.
Polarity.
She embodies chaos, unpredictability, and a touch of madness.
She's definitely a fascinating character.
She is, and she represents the potential for both positive and negative transformation.
Right.
Change can be disruptive, even destructive, but it can also lead to unexpected growth and new possibilities.
Like she embodies the inherent risk in change.
Yeah.
You'd never know for sure what you're going to get. But even in Delirium's chaos, there's this glimmer of hope. The paper suggests that even madness can be a catalyst for transformation, for breaking down old patterns and forging new connections.
That's a really insightful observation. And it highlights the fact that change isn't always linear or predictable. Sometimes it takes a complete upheaval, a descent into chaos, to pave the way for true evolution.
So we've got this whole spectrum of change happening within the endless death, embracing it, desire, manipulating it, delirium, embodying its chaotic potential.
Right.
It makes Morpheus's journey seem less like a singular event and more like a reflection of this larger universal process.
And that speaks to the core message of the Sandman change is woven into the very fabric of existence.
Okay.
It's not something we can avoid. It's something we must learn to navigate, to understand, and ultimately to embrace.
That's such a powerful idea.
Yeah.
But I have to admit, it's also a little daunting. If change is truly unavoidable, what does that mean for our sense of control?
Yeah.
Does it mean we're all just leaves blowing in the wind at the mercy of forces beyond our comprehension?
That's a great question, and one that I think a lot of people grapple with.
Yeah.
Does accepting the inevitability of change mean surrendering our free will?
Right.
Or is there a way to find agency within this constant flux of existence?
That's what I'm really curious about.
Yeah.
How do we reconcile this need for change with our desire for stability, for a sense of self that feels grounded and secure?
That's a question we'll explore in the final part of this deep dive, where we'll examine how the Sandman ultimately resolves this tension between change and identity. We'll look at how the characters, both mortal and immortal, find ways to navigate this constant flow of transformation while still retaining a sense of self.
Sounds like a fascinating discussion. I can't wait to hear your insights on this. And for our listener out there, we encourage you to ponder this question yourself. How do you balance the need for change with the desire for stability in your own life? It's a question worth some serious reflection.
Okay, so we've seen how the Sandman presents change as this fundamental force affecting everyone from powerful cosmic beings to us regular humans. And it's a bit daunting, honestly.
Like, if change is this unavoidable constant, does that mean we're all just adrift with no real control over who we become?
That's a question the comic definitely grapples with, and it's something I think a lot of us can relate to on a personal level.
For sure. So how do we reconcile the need for change with our desire for a stable sense of self?
Well, this academic paper we've been looking at argues that the Sandman actually offers a pretty hopeful answer.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How does it do that?
Well, instead of presenting change as something that just happens to us, it suggests that we have a role to play in shaping the direction of our own evolution.
Oh.
It's not about resisting change, but about learning to navigate it.
Okay.
To make conscious choices that align with who we want to become.
That's empowering. It
Yeah.
suggests we're not just victims of circumstance, but active participants in our own transformations.
Exactly. And the paper points to Morpheus' journey as a prime example.
Right, Morpheus.
He starts off as this rigid, almost tyrannical figure. But through his experiences, his trials, even his failures, he gradually learns to embrace compassion, humility, even vulnerability.
That's a far cry from the Morpheus we saw at the beginning, the one who condemned Nada to eternal suffering without a second thought.
It is. It really highlights how much growth is possible, even for someone who seemingly embodies a force as unchanging as dream.
So his transformation isn't just a passive process. He's actively making choices that lead him down a path of change.
Exactly. He chooses to confront his past mistakes, to question his own beliefs, and ultimately to embrace a new way of being.
He realizes that true power doesn't come from clinging to control, but from being open to growth, to uncertainty even.
And that idea is echoed in the journeys of the supporting characters as well.
Right, like Lucienne stepping up into a leadership role, Rose Walker learning to navigate free will and responsibility.
Exactly. Even Matthew the Raven, in accepting his transformation from human to raven,
Right.
demonstrates this power of adapting to change and finding meaning in unexpected circumstances.
So it's not just about Morpheus. It's about this capacity for change, for evolution that exists within all of us.
I think so. We all have the potential to rewrite our own narratives, to shift the direction of our own stories.
So how do we do that? How do we find that balance between accepting the inevitability of change and still maintaining a sense of self, a core identity that feels true and enduring?
That is the million-dollar question. And I think the answer lies in recognizing that our identities aren't static.
Okay.
They're fluid, evolving constructs that are constantly being shaped by our experiences, our choices, our interactions with the world.
So we're all works in progress.
Exactly. Constantly being rewritten, revised, edited. And that's where the paper offers a really insightful perspective.
Okay.
It suggests that true self-discovery isn't about clinging to a fixed idea of who we are, but about embracing this journey of becoming. It's about being open to new experiences, new perspectives, even new versions of ourselves.
So it's not about fearing change, but about seeing it as an opportunity for growth, for expansion, for becoming more fully ourselves, even if that self is constantly evolving.
Beautifully put. And I think it's a message that offers a lot of hope and encouragement, especially in a world that often feels chaotic and unpredictable.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It reminds us that we're not powerless, that we have agency to shape our own destinies, even within these larger forces of change that are constantly at play.
Exactly.
That's a powerful message. And I think it's why The Sandman continues to resonate with readers decades later. It offers this glimpse into the profound and often messy process of becoming, reminding us that change, even when it's challenging or painful, is ultimately a source of growth, transformation, and self-discovery.
Beautifully said. So what does this all mean for you?
Yeah, what parts of your story are still being written? Are you ready to embrace the changes that might come your way?
That's something to ponder as we wrap up this deep dive into The Sandman. We hope this exploration has sparked some new insights and maybe even inspired you to embrace the ever-evolving journey of becoming who you are meant to be.